Hello, babes, besties, friends, pals, all you wonderful human beings here watching me spending some time with me. How are you all? I hope you're all well. I'm just relaxing here at home. I do need to take a moment before we get into things. Please look at this Awala that my friend Casey so graciously gifted me. It is actually what I imagine myself to be if I were a water bottle, okay? A moment of appreciation. Please look at all the animals. Please look at all the cute sayings on it. It is a 10 out of 10. Solid. I am so happy. This, literally, this gift right here single-handedly changed my whole life. And I'm going to tell you to what? I'm going to tell you to what, everyone? Drink your water. I love you. Please stay hydrated. I am here today to do something that I love doing and I want to do more of here on this channel, I think. Read out loud. When I was working in a kindergarten classroom, running circle times was literally one of my favorite things. I loved reading out loud to the kids. I just even when I'm reading a book by myself and I'm trying to process things, I'm low-key muttering to myself. I love reading out loud. It's my favorite way to read. So I'm gonna read here with you guys. We're gonna work through this book. I've read this book before, but I love it. I found it in a bookstore in Connecticut, I think, called Book Barn. But basically what got me is that the title of it is called There Is a Place Where You Are Not Alone. It's by Hugh Prather. This is what it looks like. I think it's a pretty old book. Wait, let me look. I didn't even notice this when I first read it, but Charlie Stellan, August 19th, 2022, wrote his name in that before I got it. But yeah, there's no copyright, so I really have no idea how old this book is. But yeah, we're just going to get into it, I think. I was going to do a different book, but it's a book that someone gifted me to read, and I kind of want to leave that up to my own interpretation while I'm reading it before I'm reading it with you guys. Oh, wait. 1980 is when it was copyrighted. So it's a bit of an older book. The author, Hugh Prather, is indeed a counselor and teacher. It says he's worked in the fields of alcoholism, divorce, suicide, battered women, child abuse, and human relationships. He refers to himself as a co-helper because he believes that within a helping relationship, the exchange is always equal, and so there is no cost to anyone. In this book, he talks for the first time of this side of his life and of the spiritual experiences that led him to a new perception of how to be truly helpful to others. I'm kind of excited to reread this with you guys because it's been a minute since I've read it. There is a place where you are not alone. An acknowledgement. If it is possible to know such things, I know that Gail Prather, my wife, is my spiritual partner. Everything I have written in the last 12 years has been half hers because we have taken each step together, even when we thought we were far apart. Thank you, Gail, and I thank God for his endless gift. To the reader. Because there is a place in me, I know there is a place in you where you are not alone. This book is about how I once again came to that place, but this time I did not turn away. It is not a detailed account of how I arrived there, but merely a tracing of some of the actual footsteps that led me there. It contains a few key events and many of the thoughts that followed. As usual, I have left the transitions out and the inconsistencies in. I hope my description reminds you of a journey very much like your own, because now I know we walk together. Only the words we use to describe it will differ, but words will not change our direction or our deep need of each other along the way. I have worried about how you will react to this. I have imagined that you would have one of two perceptions of this book. The first is that most of what I have written is so self-deceived as to be fundamentally out of touch with reality. I might have viewed it as such probably as little as 5 years ago. The change in me is not so much an increase in wisdom as it is a new willingness to look at what else I believe and to use those terms that seem to be most appropriate. So to you who may react in this first way, I want you to know that this book does not contain everything I believe, and certainly little of how I act, but it does hint at the direction I am now attempting to walk, however hauntingly. This book is what I think can be seen by anyone and what I believe I have in fact seen. The second perception I imagine you're having is one that recognizes the enormous distance I have yet to go. I am not so fearful of this because I know that an accurate perception is also truly helpful. One of the side roads along our way is a certain competitiveness in mystical or spiritual experiences, a reverence for the form to the exclusion of content. My public role in life seems to be that of an ordinary person who can write about his ordinariness. In talking to others, I find that my spiritual experiences are also quite familiar to anyone who has seen his direction and begun to pray or meditate deeply in his own belief. I have had only one experience that might be called a vision, and although I have at times felt communicated with, I have not yet heard a voice that did not on one level seem like my own thought. But there have been some personal surprises, and I will talk about some of those shortly. What I present here is given primarily with the desire to be supportive of those of you who are at a similar spot on the road to mine, and not, I hope, calculated to impress you with my uniqueness, although I cannot promise you that I will not, at times, be influenced by that desire. As we are to each other, so is God to us. If I separate myself from you by believing that I have some special spiritual connection, I have, in my own mind, cut myself off from what joins me to you and therefore to love itself. If light allows us to see the spiritual, it must also provide the gentle recognition of what encircles us both. It must shine on the road we walk and show us how blessed we are to travel together. He signed that on May 31st, 1980 in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Author's note. This book is organized as follows. The first section gives a few of the mystical or spiritual experiences that accompanied certain changes in my thinking. The second section contains many of those new thoughts. The third section shows examples of how they can be applied. And the fourth section provides a few practice exercises or prayers. The brief discussions of crisis situations such as suicide, child abuse, and the others found in the third section come from the work I have been doing over the past 10 years. These are not intended to answer all the questions raised in these fields. The ideas are only the ones I myself have found helpful and do not include many concepts effectively used by others. They are given here as possible starting points to the reader's own thinking. There are some quotes here. Somewhere in consciousness there lies a land undiscovered, a land not yet revealed by religion, philosophy, or science. I know that it exists, for it continually pushes itself into my awareness. I know that when it discloses itself, it will change the nature of mankind. Wars will be no more, and the lamb will lie down with the lion. That was by Joel Goldsmith. Another one. This world is but the dream that you can be alone and think without affecting those apart from you. This world is but the dream that you can be alone and think without affecting those apart from you. There is a place in you where this whole world has been forgotten, where no memory of sin and of illusion linger still. There is a place in you which time has left and echoes of eternity are heard. Those last two quotes were from something called A Course of Miracles. So we're on to the first section here. Experiences. After I had written Notes on Love and Courage, I felt that, in some sense, my life was now finished. It seemed to me that within the 3 diaries I had published over the last 10 years, I had said all that I could without merely repeating myself. I felt that my work here was probably done, and very often during those first few months, I found myself waiting to die. It was not a morbid period. I've had a few suicidal times in my life and know what those are like. It was more a feeling that ran like this. I think I've done the best I could considering my limitations, so if there's anyone up there in charge of my departure, I want you to know I feel finished and relatively comfortable about leaving. But nothing happened. Then one day, I got violently sick. It occurred quite suddenly. I hardly had enough strength to get to my bed, but after a few hours I felt strong enough to attempt taking a hot bath, which I thought might ease the pain I was in. My tub is over 6 feet long and very deep. I filled it, and after soaking for maybe half an hour, I tried climbing back up the 2 steps that led to it. The last thing I remember was standing on the top step, reaching for a towel. When I came to, perhaps 20 or 30 minutes later, Gail was calling to me. I blacked out again before she was finally able to get me out of the water. Although I was still sick and was now bleeding from a blow to my head, the one thought that dominated all others was the seeming impossibility that I had not sunk underwater and drowned. If there really was a time to go, apparently mine had not come yet. But what else in life was there for me to do except make the same tired attempts to learn the same old lessons? I didn't have too long to wait for an answer. Now, as I look back at that time, I realized that instead of having learned all I could, I had not even begun. I had only reached a certain willingness to begin. I now wanted to take the first step on the journey of 1,000 miles. And as I write this, about 3 years from that time, I feel as though I have taken perhaps 2 or 3 steps. The distance yet to travel seems impossibly long. I find that I frequently give up and try to retreat. Yet there is a sanity in me which reminds me that to regret that a journey wasn't started earlier only delays further its beginning. Ooh, did you guys hear that? To regret that a journey wasn't started earlier only delays further its beginning. What I did next was a mistake. And I see now it had to be done in order for me to know why it was a mistake. Sometimes that's just how we learn things in life. I took things into my own hands. In effect, I said, now I see what the plan is and I'll take over from here. I was to do this on a large scale one more time. I will get to that a little later. Before I begin to see even a glimmering of what it means to trust the course of your life, trust is just another way of defining the 1,000-mile journey. I assumed that I was going to be around for possibly another 20 or 30 years. For what reason, I did not know, but by now I had a definite feeling that something more was yet to come, a feeling I could not account for by just a fall in a tub. I reasoned that I had better start preparing myself, and so I began a program to get into the best shape physically and mentally that I could, and along with it, to open up areas of talent I had some reason to suspect I had. I made a list of every way I wanted to improve and of all the new areas I wanted to develop. I allotted so many minutes to each category until I had filled an 8-hour schedule. For example, sculpting, 1 hour, writing, 2 hours, being a saint or doing something for someone else without his or anyone else's knowing, ½ hour, exercise, 2 hour, aberrations, doing something totally out of character, ½ hour, and so forth. I quickly found that something would usually come up during the day that would keep me from getting through the list. Consequently, I was repeating the first few activities and seldom getting to those at the end, so I decided to redefine the word day to let it mean whatever length of time it took me to accomplish what I wanted to. It often required 2 or 3 solar days to do this, and then I would start a new day. After I had lived that way for a few weeks, certain activities began to take over. For example, I started spending more and more time sculpting and painting, whereas the time I had set aside to study, say Latin, went consistently unused. Also, I was deeply impressed with the effects in my mental state on the ½ hour spent being a saint. Just one pure intention without the expectation of even gratitude in return would at times make everything in my experience glow gently and warmly for hours. I'm going to read that over so that you guys hear that. Just one pure intention without the expectation of even gratitude in return would at times make everything in my experience glow gently and warmly for hours. I remember wondering what it would be like to devote one's entire life to this approach, but I made no attempt to try it for even a day. During this time, I began to feel a strong urge to do something on behalf of Notes of Love and Courage. The only thing I could think of was to go on a promotional tour, and that, I believe, would be a form of prostitution. I had made very few public appearances up to then and had, in fact, turned down all invitations outside of a small radius around Santa Fe. However, the urge I felt persisted, and it was the kind of feeling I had written about in my books and had advised others to follow. It was strong and calm, a gentle but persistent nudging. During this period of conflict over whether or not to go, something happened that was so unexpected that if journeys begin with a single step, this was probably my first. I wish the little story that follows were more elegant. I realize it is a ludicrous way to have the course of one's life changed, but it is simply the way it happened. Why it affected me so deeply may be hard to understand. Part of the explanation is that the words I was given took me straight back to a time when I had felt a deep conviction about the purpose of my life. I was being called on to keep an old promise. Gail and I had just met Dan and Dory, and they invited us to dinner. We were joined by a friend of theirs named Dee, who had recently come to town. It was the first time they had seen her since the three of them had shared a house together. They told us that after dinner, they planned to do a procedure, which used to help them be less afraid when they had lived together. They described it and said they would like Gail and me to join them if we wanted to. We said yes, and so after dinner, we all went into their kitchen and sat around a table. Dee tore up pieces of paper and wrote out the letters of the alphabet, the words yes and no, the numbers 0 through 9, and put them on the table in a large circle. The five of us then stacked our hands on top of an empty water glass, which had been turned upside down in the center of the circle. Dory, who was the facilitator, closed her eyes and asked if there were any messages for anyone. The glass immediately began circling within the ring of papers with extraordinary force, and then indicated there was a message for Gail. Dory asked what it was, and the glass spelled out the words, "Your function is to love." I asked who the message was from. The answer was JC. I said, "Does that stand for Jesus Christ?" The glass went to yes. At this point, the entire situation took on a certain light absurdity for me. I was fairly certain that Dory was the one moving the glass, even if she wasn't doing it consciously. She had exhibited a suspicious liking for unusual happenings, having already claimed to have seen a UFO on 2 occasions, and yet she appeared honest and natural, so I assumed she was merely tricking herself. Then the glass indicated it had a message for me. It was, "Do go." This startled me because no one else at the table except possibly Gail should have had any way of knowing what that meant. I didn't think the other 3 people were even aware that I was a writer, but if that were not so, they certainly would have no way of knowing I had been wrestling with that question. After I explained to them what the "do go" meant, Dory asked if there were any further messages for me. Yes, indicated the glass, and spelled out "Love Man." Dory asked if there was something more. Yes, please, love man. She said she was sure I understood the message, and was there anything else? Yes, do go. And so it went, over and over, the same words, "Love man, please go, please love man," for what seemed like an hour or hour and a half. During this time, people would get tired and remove their hands so that at some point, only I or only Gail and I had our hands on the glass, and yet it continued to move exactly as before. Finally, Dory said, "Please tell us how many previous lives he has had." The glass went 0. Seemingly paying no attention to that answer, she asked, "When did he die last?" The glass spelled out 1957. "Oh," she said, "that's a mistake." "No," I told her, "that was the year I gave up my boyhood religion. And in those days, the way I frequently expressed my religious conviction to myself was to think, I only have one thing to do in life, and that is to love man." Then the glass went to the number 8 and spelled out "great joy." It did this several times, repeating the number 8 and the word joy. It was not until 2 years later that I had my first unusual experience with that number. It was in connection with the birth of our son, John, who had so many 8s associated with the time being his conception and birth that it became a running joke that repeatedly delighted us. Since then, there have been other experiences with 8, all gentle and happy moments and always unanticipated. I have no idea what that number means. I remember nothing unusual in my life associated with 8, and numerology has been of no interest to me. As Gail and I drove back from Dan and Dory's home, we asked each other what had actually happened and what did it all mean. Neither of us really knew. I was left with nothing more concrete than that I had been communicated with by something that knew me very intimately. I felt loved and looked after. By what, I did not know. The one thing I could feel with certainty was that a circle had been completed and that I would never be the same again. In the weeks that followed, I tried to pray in the way I had as a boy, but I felt awkward and dishonest. I also tried praying to whatever had communicated with me that evening. I found myself saying silly things like, "Whoever you are, I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I would like to know what I'm supposed to do now." I finally gave all that up and started working each morning on a list of qualities or attributes towards which my life seemed to be moving me. For some time, I had been feeling a growing conviction that all events had a direction. Life could be thought of as a type of spiritual evolution. For example, I had noticed how I and others, as time passed, were becoming more sensitive to other people's pain and less willing to harm anything at all. This was not a shared philosophical position, but an instinctive transformation. It seemed a very slow but unmistakable process. I felt that whatever had spoken to me was already at the point towards which I was only moving, but I did not know what to do about that, and my efforts to contact it only frustrated me. If, however, I was evolving towards it, possibly there was a way I could get behind my own evolution. In an attempt to do that, I began thinking every morning about the qualities I had so far identified. I would ask myself what it meant to be honest, open, gentle, patient, pure, and so forth. I would simply let my mind dwell on each one, and I would often write down what occurred to me. I was already doing this when I went on my first small promotional tour. I'd always assumed that I would be able to write while traveling and appearing on talk shows, etc. But in those 2 weeks, I did more writing than at any other comparable period in my life. After I would finish with my morning meditation on a now growing list of qualities, I would feel as if I had been lifted an inch or two off the ground, and the entire day would continue like a gentle walk with friends down some lovely beach. Everywhere I went, I found I wanted to talk about basic goodness, fairness, humanity, goodwill. It seemed that within a few simple qualities could be found our entire way out. After the second small tour, I was back in Santa Fe with nothing further scheduled. I had signed a 2-book contract with my publisher, and the first book was not due for about 2 years, so I mentally sat back and waited to see what would happen next. Very shortly, I was introduced to a book entitled The Spiritual Journey of Joel Goldsmith. Books seek us out. They slip themselves into our hands just at the time we are ready for a new self-concept. For me, this book served the purpose of suggesting a way of meditating or praying that I knew I could try with enthusiasm. I have never liked the techniques or procedures that are usually taught as an essential part of meditation, and I have already noted the problems I had with my boyhood form of prayer. This, however, was the simplest and most direct approach I had read. It had evidently just occurred to Joel Goldsmith one day to try sitting in a chair and listening. Nothing more than that. He would usually do this for only a few minutes, then get up and go about his work. When he felt like doing it again, he would, but only for as long as made him happy. By the end of the day, he would ordinarily have taken 10, 20, 30 or more of these prayer breaks, but this large number was not a goal he set in advance. When I started trying something similar myself, often I was not aware of any unusual occurrences during those times or of any special results afterward, but eventually a moment would come when something so not of this world would intrude itself that I would at times find myself questioning my own sanity. It seemed inappropriate to speak of these experiences to anyone. Even the thought of doing so felt somehow irreverent or sacrilegious, and I was also afraid of what others might think of me. The underlying rapture of the experience itself was unmistakable, but there were moments when I was distressed over what I suspected was happening to my mind, and yet I felt a powerful urgency to continue. I had to sit in that chair. It was as though I were being carried along by a shift in the direction of my planet. Now that I have met many others who have had these types of experiences, I realize that mine were fairly typical, even commonplace, within the context of meditation or deep prayer. Once again, I seem to be an ordinary person whose work is to write about his ordinariness, and I wish to share these experiences with you because I am convinced that if you haven't already, you will eventually go through something very similar. There is no reason why anyone should feel guilt or painful self-doubt over what is a natural process of growth. I'm going to stop there because the chapter continues on, but my throat hurts. But I'm excited. It's a good book. But also, if you guys can see from me like flipping through the pages like that, it gets different the more we read on. But yeah, this whole thing is like his whole beginning story. I'm gonna finish the second half at a later date because it's a little bit late in the day right now and I still need to make myself some dinner and try and get some homework done. But I was up here already getting cozy because I had therapy today, which has been really nice. I have a male therapist for like the first time ever in my life. It's a very interesting experience just because it's like a different perspective on like some of the stuff I talk with him about, which is really cool. But anyway, I had therapy up here, so it's already cozied up. And while I was doing my therapy, I saw this book on my stack of books and I was like, dang, this will be a fun one to read. So yeah, I remember when I got this book, like I said, I got it at Book Barn in Connecticut, but I brought it home. So I must have read this a couple years, probably like 3 years ago. So I remember reading it, and I remember I found the Prayer of Assisi, I think it was, in the book. And I took that prayer because it was right around the time I was starting to really like reconnect with God. But I took that prayer and I pressed ferns from a walk I was on in the woods. And I have that piece of art hanging in my house to this day. But yeah, anyway, I love you guys. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to my story. Hopefully I'll see you on the next one. Okay. Stay beautiful, stay kind, stay great, stay awesome, stay amazing, stay wonderful, stay happy, stay healthy.